In a way, this is a kind of garden. I've made a kind of garden here. And I think every garden is a human vision of utopia. That when a person makes a garden around their house or in a public garden, you're designing a kind of controlled view of the human and nature together, and it's a kind of idea of utopia. So in this case, I had two models that I worked from. One was the Bosch painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, which of course represents the Garden of Eden, another famous garden, but it also represents hell. And the other model I had was the famous Zen garden in Ryonaji in Kyoto, which is I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. It's the garden with the 13 rocks in a bed of raked sand. And there's a viewing platform on two sides, and wherever you stand, you can only see 12 rocks. You can never see all 13. So there's this idea about the invisible as well. So in this case, I made, physically it's more based on the Japanese garden, on the Zen garden. It's a rectangle. Instead of raked sand, we have bifus. And bifus has a long history as both in the worlds of magic and shamanism in Europe and in Asia, especially in Mongolia and Korea, but also in Germany and in England in the Middle Ages and so on. So I bring it here as a kind of like magical bed on which everything else sits. And then in the garden we have a little garden house, a kind of pavilion. And in this case, the pavilion is, I think, a cross between a ball gown and a house. So it's a kind of couture idea of a house. And I think that a ball gown, and I think Salzburg is a city of ball gowns, right? It's you see the most astonishing dresses if you go to the right events here.
What is ball gown?
Ball gown, it's those very grand, one-of-a-kind dresses for going to the opera, this kind of thing. So I've made this one-of-a-kind ball gown for this garden, and my husband made it, Mark-Jan Krayenhoff van der Leur, and it took 6 people 3.5 months to make this. And it still has some work to be done on it, but it's coming. When I lay the bifus, every time I do an exhibition, I lay a bed of this herb, some sort of ritual herb. I usually wear this performance costume, which is over there. I meditate on the forgotten dead from that place. So here I meditated on the witches and the women and the gay men who were burnt at the stake in the Inquisition or murdered in other ways. So they become like a forgotten population that I invite into this garden. The physical setup is like the Zen garden. I don't have 13 things. I think I have 7 or 8. But the deer are in a way like the witches' familiars. I don't know what you would call that in German. It's the animal, like every witch has an animal, usually a black cat.
Black cat.
That is their familiar. So in this case, the deer are my familiars. And in fact, they're usually standing around in my apartment in Berlin. The 2 Chinese ceramics are a collaboration with Adrian Hermanides, who's standing here. And so one is a 19th century, actually is a fish bowl that they would have in a garden. In fact, it's in exactly the right place. And instead of the traditional wooden stand that they use in China, we have 2 very happy fish in there. And the goldfish, of course, are very much for good luck in Chinese culture. Adrian came up with this contemporary version, which is still a kind of puzzle.
These pieces that I collaborated on, they emerged really out of a conversation that we were already having in relation to the wooden structures for the tents. AA and I had already made one together, and we were already kind of discussing this one here, the second one. And through those conversations, we had kind of developed a kind of structural and visual language that I think both of us found kind of very satisfying, which was really to develop a structure out of kind of interlocking wooden forms that required no glue, no screws, and that really could be built by anybody in almost under any circumstances. That could just be fit together almost like a three-dimensional children's puzzle, but in quite a sophisticated way. So when AA approached me to collaborate on these pieces, I kind of just drew on the language that we were already, and on the conversation that we were already having. And the forms kind of emerged from these kind of interlocking forms that we had already developed a system to produce. Somehow or another, out of that, they kind of developed into three-dimensional mandalas, which I find obviously like mirrored here in the exhibition in other ways. So with this piece here, and I think with the lamp as well, this kind of idea somehow reemerges.
Is called Family Secrets. And so that's where we put all the difficult memories that we don't want to think about. And the lid is extremely heavy, and it's a bit fragile, it could fall over, so we're not going to find out what those secrets are. The rose petal, the rose mandala, I always got my friend Chrysanne to come and build this rose petal mandala. This is just the beginning of it. It will completely fill this space on the floor with rose petals. And then as the exhibition goes on, the petals dry and get smaller, and it changes its feeling. And they're based on the traditional Tibetan sand paintings, where they make very complex mandalas out of colored sand, and then at the end of the process, they actually blow the sand away and destroy the painting again. And so we're planning, if all goes well, I don't think Seamus even knows about this yet, we want to blow away the rose petals on the last day of the exhibition.
I've known AA for a long time, and from Toronto, where I lived as a young artist. And I was also on the board of Art Metropole, which he and General Idea founded in the early 70s. Which disseminates artists' publications and materials. And in the past 10 years, I've done a number of projects with him, including Rose Mandela at Union, and then at the Wit to Wit, so this particular work. We share a history of friends, going back to the General Idea and the Toronto art community and also the New York art community, and also interests into different iconographies and philosophies, and I'm very supportive of his interest in shamanism and spiritual metaphysical and the intersection between art and such activities. This piece is called the Rosemere Mandela. It originally, it has had many different stages or invocations. The first large one with the blue mirror was for a conference at the University of Buffalo on law and Buddhism with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it was made so that the lawyers would all sit around the mandala while His Holiness and talk about law in a very academic setting. And after that, I did one at Union, where AA was the Institute for Art and Social Justice. And so I did one within the beautiful Baroque sort of surroundings there. And then this one, so the mirror still exists in New York. You know, and it can come out at different times, the blue mirror. And the blue mirror sort of symbolizes the sky and the water and the idea of emptiness.
Hammer on the end, because, you know, when I first put this together, I should say the posters on the low table are by Gareth Long, and they're kind of an overview, his idea of an overview or an introduction to the exhibition. And when I described it to him, before I was completely finished, he said, "You've left out hell. I don't see any hell in that." He said, "You need J.X. Williams." So J.X. Williams is a lesbian priestess from New Orleans, a black lesbian priestess, and originally she proposed to make a piece which is a kind of mobile, made with a harp with hammers rotating around the harp. And we didn't finish the piece in time, unfortunately. So instead, we have a small piece by J.X. Williams, which is just a sledgehammer with tape around the handle. And it's a very Canadian piece, actually, because it's made with hockey tape. It's the tape that you put on the handle of a hockey stick. Matthias' two photos of jock straps, the kind of emblems, icons. They're like play the part of the religious icons a little bit. I think they're a way of, they kind of queer the whole space. And in the other half of this exhibition is in Graz. And in Graz, we have a whole room for Matthias's photos. And he's also produced a new book, which is a book entirely of burning jock straps and burning penises. It's a very strange book. And also in Graz, Chrysanne will make another Rosemere Mandela, so they'll be like twins in the two cities. Tonight, Ebok, British artist, will be doing a sound performance sitting in the tent. And he also did the sound, which seems to have turned off now, the sound which should fill the space at all times. In Graz, we have a smaller tent, and we have a performance by Canadian artist Michael Dudek, and it's a kind of ritual, very old ritual Jewish chant. So we have the Buddhist, we'll have the Jewish, and then I also have a young artist from South Africa who's Muslim, who is doing a kind of Islamic chant in yet another tent. So we have lots of circles and tents and references to different religions.